Well, new this morning, a senior Israeli official confirming to Fox News the IRGC's head of intelligence has been killed in a new wave of strikes. The commander of the Quds Forces Special Operations Unit was also taken out. This comes after the U.S. successfully rescued the second airman who was lost in the Iranian mountains following Tehran shooting down an American F-15 jet over the weekend. That one airman survived nearly 2 days behind enemy lines, hiding at over 7,000 feet in a mountain crevice. The President Trump telling Fox News' Trey Yingst he is expecting a deal with Iran as early as today, saying, quote, the big thing is they're not going to have a nuclear weapon. They're not even negotiating that point. It's so easy. That's already been conceded. Most of the points are conceded. I think there is a good chance tomorrow they are negotiating now. You're going to see bridges and power plants dropping all over their country if they don't make a deal and fast. I'm considering blowing everything up and taking over the oil. I want to bring in former Trump State Department senior advisor Christian Whiton. Christian, you know, the Wall Street Journal and our own Matt Finn at Fox News also reporting the UAE wants the Strait of Hormuz open by any means necessary, and they're willing to join the fight alongside of the United States to get the strait open. Your thoughts?
Well, it's a big deal. We're really seeing the UAE step up as a key regional ally along with Israel. Of course, the UAE was one of the first into the Abraham Accords to establish ties with Israel. Really a key partner, perhaps more so than Saudi Arabia and certainly more so than Qatar in joining the United States and opposing Iran. Iran has targeted all of the Gulf Arab states, but in particular the UAE, even though it wasn't attacked directly by the UAE. So, you know, I think we're seeing here the Arabs are on our side much more so than our supposed European NATO allies, but they're very concerned, of course, that we also together reopen the strait because it's their actual oil and gas that's sold through that geography.
Oh, you mentioned NATO. I want to bring this up because the Wall Street Journal has a piece. I think it's interesting. The title is NATO Reaching Breaking Point Over War. Tensions mount as conflict worsens, frosty relationship, and there's no trust left. Mark Rutte, as you know, is going to be coming to Washington on Wednesday, and Thursday. He is going to be meeting with the president, with cabinet officials, Secretary of State, to try and figure out what our NATO relationship is. What do you expect to happen here? Because President Trump's made it very clear that he's very frustrated with the lack of partnership from NATO.
Right. Well, Rutte is doing what Europeans do and what NATO does, which is attend meetings. They make statements and they do pointless things, and they are a pointless organization. This is always put, incidentally, blamed on Trump. Trump is just sort of recognizing the reality. He's just pulled the curtain back to show that Europe cannot do anything without the United States. They don't have the means. They don't have the will. The mighty Royal Navy, the British military that once spanned the entire globe, can't even send a couple of frigates or its broken aircraft carriers to help in the strait or to help broadly. And then the French who now go and say, oh, well, we'll get involved. But after the military fight is over, what are they going to do? They're going to show up and what, repaint the buoys? Are they going to fix the lights on the buoys? Are they going to prance around in their uniforms? This really just shows, I mean, everyone has known that the U.S. is the biggest part of NATO. But really, perhaps the U.S. is the only part of NATO. And if they're not going to, it's not that they're not even coming to our aid in Iran. They're opposing us. Spain is preventing us from using our military bases in NATO. So I don't think there's a combination of words that actually fixes this problem.
Interesting. Well, he's going to try and do some damage control, but to your point, it may not work. And I agree with you, Christian. They're great at making statements and holding symposiums, and that's about it. Let's talk about China in all of this, because China reportedly is willing to maintain cooperation with Russia to cool tensions in the Middle East and open up the Strait of Hormuz. This hurts China and more than anyone at this point. This is coming from a phone call between Beijing and Moscow's foreign ministers. Meanwhile, China did issue a 40-day shutdown of the offshore airspace. That paves the way for potential military operations against Taiwan, despite it being hundreds of miles away, Christian. So, you know, the energy crunch, start there with how this affects China. And the other question is, do we want to see a sitting president go to China if we still have this ongoing conflict with Iran in the month of May?
Yeah, to your first question on energy, China does have a substantial amount of energy. It's been buying from Iran, more than about a quarter, about a fifth, that it's able to buy below market values because Iranian oil has been sanctioned. Of course, it also buys Russian oil for the exact same reason. If that oil isn't flowing or if it's actually constrained, because there is some traffic through the Strait of Hormuz, then China will have to start paying market prices for energy, which will hurt China's economy even more. You know, I read something today from Representative Ro Khanna saying China's better off and the United States is worse off because of the president's trade agenda. That just isn't true. China's economy is sputtering. So, yeah, if we're still in major combat operations, it might be a little tricky for the president to travel, though he may not want to seem trapped in Washington either. He can actually command a lot of the war from anywhere in the world. And going to China when they are in economic doldrums, their economic recovery post-pandemic is still a failure, and pressing on issues like Jimmy Lai, who, again, the Brits should be trying to get out of prison in Hong Kong. He's their national, but only Trump is the one who's brought this up seriously with China and pressing China on other issues. So I think actually that is somewhat of a political moving force, that the summit, which is scheduled for mid-May, may actually be one of the reasons Trump would like to wrap this up sooner.
Well, and obviously, I'm assuming that you're from the side of this that it's important that we maintain that we fix the trade relationship with the Chinese, despite all of the other threats that we could talk about. And Maria has reported on from a national security perspective. The trade relationship also is a component of that. How do you negotiate between those two things?
Yeah, I think it's hard. I think Trump does have to pick and choose some battles. You can't be fighting this multi-front, both kinetic war and trade war. And Europe has sort of raised its hand, and I think, again, before the Iran war and now with the war, to be target number one, along with Canada, because of extremely poor leadership there, not realizing the degree to which they are dependent on the United States for trade. And so if you're fighting the Europeans and the Canadians on trade, can you also fight China? I think Trump is sort of choosing maybe not. On the other hand, China lied about its trade deal in Trump's first term, the so-called Phase 1 agreement. So I don't think you trust but verify with China. I think you distrust and verify. If we're going to cut a trade deal, okay, but they have to be seen complying very clearly, or else tariffs should go up. I think the president has maybe given China a little bit too much benefit of the doubt, but okay, he's the one, and he's been the toughest president in sort of history since Eisenhower on China. But the Chinese really have to deliver something for Trump, I think.
There's also new this morning the fact that Ukrainian officials are reportedly flagging this potential meeting with U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner that would happen later this month. And then they're hoping to restart ceasefire negotiations and end Russia's war on Kyiv. The White House hasn't confirmed any of this, but they're saying it could take place after April 12th, Christian. What do you make of this?
Right. Well, it's not a surprise. I think Trump is still very concerned with that war, even though it's not sort of foremost on his mind for U.S. national security or national interest reasons. But here again, the Europeans have put the Ukrainians in a very bad position. So Witkoff goes, what can he say? I mean, it's just a reality that Russia still exports more than 4 million barrels per day of oil, and the price of that oil has doubled. Now, Russia must sell it at a discount, like the Iranians, because of sanctions, but it's just going to be making more money because of this conflict, and for Witkoff to have to go and say, listen, the United States is going to be diverting advanced munitions, missile interceptors, some of the targeting and intelligence information that the United States has been providing to Ukraine, which is almost as important as the drones themselves or the money itself. If that has to shift to the Middle East because European NATO is not stepping up and Europe won't step into any void that we leave in Ukraine, it's really putting them in a bad position. So I think you'll see more pressure put on the Ukrainians to settle with Russia.
That's an interesting point that you make there. Well, we'll see if the White House confirms that meeting and those negotiations. And I'm glad you made the point about Russian oil, because this situation in the Strait makes it more difficult for them as well. Christian Whiton, it's always great to speak with you. Thank you for being here this morning.
Thanks, Cheryl.